In potentially one of the most memorable moments in the post-apartheid political history of South Africa, President Cyril Ramaphosa has finally come out and spoken on the raging controversy surrounding economic freedom fighters, EFF, leader Julius Malema and an alleged arrest warrant issued by UK authorities. For days, the country was awash with gossip, leaked memos, and unsubstantiated reports that the United Kingdom had lodged a formal application for Malema's arrest and extradition in relation to suspected global financial misdeeds, illegal weapons deals, and foreign political meddling. As the speculation reached a fever pitch and questions rang ever louder, Ramaphosa kept his silence carefully, eschewing being pulled into the tempest until now. In a top-security press conference at the Union Buildings this morning, the president strode into the room with the unmistakable swagger of someone who knew he was there to command attention. His shoulders were thrown back, his face steely, and the import of the moment seemed to fall heavily on the huddle of journalists and officials in front of him. The atmosphere was heavy with tension and expectation. Top members of the cabinet, officials from the Ministry of Justice, and representatives of the foreign media were all present, a clear indication that this was not going to be an ordinary briefing, but one that would be historic in nature. South Africa is an independent nation ruled by law. We are equally a valued member of the international community. As such, we do not and will not place ourselves in the path of international justice, Ramaphosa said. His words had a studious weight, and for a moment the room was frozen. He stopped, looked out over the crowded hall that was filled with flicking cameras and waiting eyes, and went on with what many are already referring to as a public point-blank indictment of Malema's shaky legal situation. We cannot say we are defenders of democracy and justice if we shield individuals, however politically influential, who might be under legitimate charges in other jurisdictions. This is not a matter of party loyalty. It's a matter of legal integrity. Gas echoed around the room as the full import of his words became clear. The EFF had for years criticized Ramaphosa as being too silent in the midst of controversy, of being indecisive, and of protecting allies and even rivals from consequences through silence. But on this day, the president used a radically different tone, unapologetic, resolute, and radically clear. Onlookers remarked that his statements appeared crafted not merely to respond to Malema's situation but to send a larger message that South Africa's rule of law could not and would not be warped to the desires of political influence. While the precise contents of the UK arrest warrant are still under diplomatic secrecy, sources in the National Prosecuting Authority, NPA, and top officials in the Department of International Relations and Cooperation confirmed that the charges pertain to a complex network of financial corruption. Charges include money laundering via UK shell companies, suspicious payments by affluent political donors into offshore accounts, and illicit arms talks with British arms manufacturers. As reported, the UK Serious Fraud Office, SFO, began probing after it identified financial connections between EFF-affiliated business groups and procurement networks red-flagged for corruption and fraud throughout Europe. The probe, sources claim, had been quietly underway for more than a year before emerging in leaked reports last week. Within minutes of Ramaphosa's post going viral, Julius Malema fired back in classic defiance style. Using social media, he tweeted on X, which was originally Twitter, "Let them come. I fear not the colonial court and no subservient president. Ramaphosa has ever been a servant of the West." Today, he confirmed it. The tweet, replete with Malema's characteristic cockiness, went viral on all digital media. Hashtags #HandsOffSick and #Ramaphosa the puppet trended across the country within hours. Malema went on to assert that the charges against him were not just invented but formed part of a deliberate plan to subdue and destroy the EFF before the 2026 general election. He accused Ramaphosa of masterminding a betrayal in alliance with foreign governments and domestic intelligence services, casting the problem not as one of justice but as one of political conspiracy. The EFF base predictably mobilized quickly. Supporters flocked to the Johannesburg, Cape Town, and Polokwane streets as small but passionate crowds of people congregated in Parliament and outside regional EFF offices. Hands off CIC and down with puppet presidents were heard in the streets. Red berets dominated the scene, representing defiance and loyalty to Mima. Although the protests were fairly peaceful in the morning, law enforcement officials are still on high alert as they are worried the movement would degenerate into violent clashes if tensions keep rising. The response from the wider political landscape of South Africa was similarly polarized. DA leader John Steenhuisen welcomed the president publicly for finally prioritizing justice over political expediency and demanded the complete release of the UK's legal request to put an end to all the speculation once and for all. In contrast, EFF Deputy President Floyd Shivambu lashed out at Ramaphosa in a vociferous speech, labeling him the worst traitor since apartheid and accusing the ANC of issuing a call to war against black liberation. In the view of Shivambu, Ramaphosa's red cooperation with foreign governments illustrated not just the betrayal of Malema but also of South Africa's sovereignty. Noted jurists and commentators also took their turn. Advocate Thuli Madinsela characterized Ramaphosa's actions as being consistent with the constitution, pointing out that the president was doing what was required of him to maintain the sovereignty of the law as opposed to submitting to political personalities. Others warned, however, that extradition proceedings would create a perilous precedent if due process was not scrupulously adhered to. International monitors and foreign news outlets are keeping a close eye on events, with some embassies in Pretoria issuing travel warnings to their nationals. It is reported that Parliament is making preparations for an emergency sitting early next week to consider the mounting unrest and the wider implications of the possible extradition. South Africa is now bound by constitutional experts to enter complicated diplomatic negotiations with the UK in order to determine the legitimacy of the warrant as well as how extradition would legally be able to proceed. According to Dr. Marius Praetorius, a constitutional law expert, the process can either escalate into a lengthy legal struggle or fall apart altogether if the state does not act. This can precipitate a full-fledged extradition war, he cautioned, or it can fail if the government holds out. But rest assured, the world is watching. If confirmed, this would be the first time in South African democratic history that an incumbent head of a major political party will stand trial on charges of crimes committed overseas. This situation would not only try the mettle of the nation's judiciary, but also pose deep questions regarding sovereignty, global cooperation, and the frequently cross-border between politics and law. The aftermath could redefine the political landscape affecting alliances, public opinion, and the balance of power as the 2026 elections loom. Ramaphosa concluded his press conference with words that appeared tactfully selected not just for Mima but for the country and his ANC critics themselves. Let us not twist the law in order to shield those we politically admire. Let us not violate the law in order to demolish those we politically detest. We owe this nation better, and history will judge us by what we decided to fight for. His final words were answered by a combination of stunned quiet and random mutterings, as if those in the room realized that they had just seen the first shot fired in what may be a defining political struggle of the next few years. With those words, Ramaphosa might have unleashed one of the most important confrontations of his presidency and one of the most defining pages in the history of South Africa's democracy. The curtain is now raised for a confrontation not only between president and opposition leader but between law and disobedience, between sovereignty and global duty, and between two fundamentally opposing visions for the future of the nation. Whether it ends up consolidating South Africa's democracy or rends its tender seams apart remains to be written. But one certainty is this: history is being made in front of our very eyes and the whole world is watching intently.